Good afternoon. My name is Paul Charnier. I'm the editorial page editor at the Day newspaper. We welcome you again to our forum, Lunch with the Candidates. Today's forum will involve our candidates from the 41st House District, which includes sections of Groton and New London. And our candidates today are the incumbent Republican representative, Aundre Bumgardner, and his Democratic challenger, Joe De La Cruz. I'm joined today by news columnist David Collins and by Day staff writer Deborah Strasheim. So we're going to have the next hour to discuss issues relevant to the state and to our region. And we're going to go right to questions, and at the end of our hour, we'll give both candidates a chance to summarize. So our first question is from Deborah Strasheim, and it's to Representative Bumgardner.
The budget plan you support for the state would cap borrowing. How do you reconcile your support for this plan with the $100 million the state would have to borrow to help pay for Groton's proposed $184 million school construction project?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for setting this debate up, and thank you, Joe, for joining in what will be absolutely a great conversation. So on the issue of the school plan, I would say I've been a steadfast supporter of the cap you had mentioned on future borrowing. The state of Connecticut right now is not in any position to incur any more debt. Right now, Connecticut's in the position actually to shed a lot of projects that are currently authorized on the bond commission. And as a result of that, Connecticut moving forward really needs to take a look at future projects that are in motion, and certainly projects that are on the books already, to maybe do away with the ones that there really isn't a need for anymore. So on the issue again of the school, I worked steadfast in understanding the numbers that would affect the school project. I do have concerns, however, that with this current plan that is moving forward to the taxpayers, without that state reimbursement, that taxpayers simply will not be able to afford it at the when it comes to the property tax level, because a lot of folks don't realize that over time, not only are you paying the cost of actually constructing those buildings, but you're going to be paying the debt service on those on that plan as well. So I certainly think that in the future, for when we take a look at the Groton schools, that we do it by a piecemeal approach. But as far as doing it sort of in a comprehensive way, in which could be in excess of potentially even $200 million when you kind of look at finally building out, and certainly there's a time frame that needs to be followed. So as of now, I'm not supportive of it, but I certainly will continue having an open mind about future building projects structured in a way that is far more affordable for the taxpayers.
Mr. De La Cruz, the topic of the Groton School project, and in the context of the high level of state borrowing we've already seen, your comments?
I think it's one of those situations where we may have, I don't want to say we waited too long. It seems like the reimbursement rate goes down and down and down. And as I go to doors and meet people and remind them that Groton New London's charter does not include education. Funny enough, because we do pay for about 50 or 60% of it. As far as the buildings are concerned, I think, that isn't something that the state can cut. We're going to need those new buildings in Groton. I think they've done a great job in New London. I think that, the reimbursement rate has been very good in New London, and I want to be able to bring that to Groton. It seems like we have dropped into that racial imbalance. Again, do I agree or disagree with even that? I'm not sure, but the fact is we're shipping kids all across our town, and when you go to sell a house in Groton, if the selling point is where do your kids go to school, and you say, well, this year they go here, next year we don't know, and that's happening a lot in Groton. It's happened in my neighborhood. It's not happening in my friends' neighborhoods, where they bought houses close to a certain school because they wanted their kids to be able to walk home. And we don't have that consistency in Groton now. I think it's they say that kids can vote with their feet now. They're doing it about 500 times a day out of Groton into New London. So we're kind of at an impasse in Groton with the three schools we're talking about rebuilding are in the 65-year plus age. So again, and I want to remind everybody, it's not an issue of not doing anything and saving $184 million. Those schools are 65 years old, and we're going to have to, and the state's going to have to. I know, I get it, that there are huge financial problems, but this is something that it's our education, and we're going to have to find a way to fund it. And that's what I plan on doing when I get up there.
Mr. Bumgardner, yeah, go ahead. And then I had a follow-up, but go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, I think first and foremost, we need to look at the reason as to why the district moved forward in building these schools or proposing to build these schools. They've cited racial imbalance as a critical issue as or an impetus to be able to rebuild these schools. And so if that's the issue, I really think at the state level, we need to have a comprehensive discussion about that statute, especially as it relates to Groton's situation. I think there's been much inaction on that issue, and I started having that conversation in as a member of the Black and Puerto Rican caucus, which certainly a lot of those folks are well aware of that statute, especially as it relates to how our more urban school districts operate. And certainly, I think Groton has a different characteristic than perhaps Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven. And so maybe the statute doesn't necessarily apply to Groton in a way that it's intended to do as a result of having the submarine base, which is where the sailors are quite transient and their families are transient. So at any given point during the year, you may have an influx of families coming in from the sub-base, and as a result, your numbers may be skewed, and all of a sudden your school will be racially imbalanced. So I really think we need to have a comprehensive discussion about that issue, and I'm committed to continuing that conversation and see action on that issue so that perhaps in the future Groton doesn't run into these sort of perpetual problems of being in balance and then not in balance.
Mr. De La Cruz, yeah, do you have any concerns about the diversity statute and how it's now?
No, I don't. I think the way it's played out, I think you had it's kind of a blanket for the whole state, and you can't pick and choose where it works and where it doesn't. So to me, and again, we are a different area, but I would say that the racial imbalance could be solved with our new program that we pushed through. I was on that building. It's called the School Initiatives Task Force for 18 months, and again, they put it as an option of, and I saw the day editorial said that maybe it was too expensive. It's not $0 or $184 million. It's, our share of it would be about $94 million. And what it's going to do is create one junior high school and then 2 large elementaries, which in essence will take away any of this racial imbalance. It couldn't happen again. Certainly couldn't happen at the junior high with 1 junior high instead of 2. And that's not a problem just yet at the junior high, but it's something that could happen being as where the 2 junior highs are located on separate sides of town, different economics. So it's forward thinking, I think. Also, we used to have 14 schools in Groton. It was on the RTM in 02 to 08, and we had 14 schools. We're down to 10. This new plan would bring us down to 8, which means you're heating 8 buildings. And I think that's contrition kind of is where the state is looking to invest. And certainly if we keep 2 junior highs open in 5 years when we need to really do something with them because they are older, I don't know what kind of appetite the state's going to have for renovating 2 junior highs in a town the size of Groton with our population. So we have to think of all those things as Groton voters. I think it's the most important question on our ballot. Of course, hopefully, who you're going to vote for is a big question. But also, this is going to set Groton's tone for the next 65 years. And someone built those schools for us to go to 65 years ago. And now it's time for us to move forward and make it available for our kids.
Before we move to the next question, clearly Mr. De La Cruz is in favor of the project. Have you decided, Representative Bumgardner, whether you're in favor or opposed to the project as it now is on the ballot?
Well, as it currently stands, I do not support the initiative. But I would suggest in the future that when we are crafting these plans, that as the Dan mentioned in a recent editorial, that we look to really make the plan no more expensive than the Phase 2 proposal quite a few years back. I think really that the town, based on going door to door and talking to a lot of families, especially seniors, I'm not sure Groton has an appetite for any more tax increases, which you'll certainly get with the plan as it stands. So I as of now I do not support the plan, but I certainly think in the future there needs to the town collectively needs to work to craft a plan that is not nearly as expensive as what we have now, and certainly addresses maintaining the schools so that kids can learn in them and be healthy kids in them as well.
All right.
Can I just
very briefly, just because we want to move on?
I'm sorry, but being on that school committee, I can unequivocally tell you that if we go back to the drawing board, without a shadow of a doubt, that number is going to be higher, and a lot of it has to do with construction costs and different areas of different reasons why it would be higher. But mostly, I want to remind people in Groton that when this thing finally does hit the ballot, when it does come to the voter, it is not just vetted by a town council. I mean, this was a charter that was set by the previous council that I was even on in 2012 to come up with a plan. And that it required 3 years of meetings, me being to 18 months of them. And you hit roadblocks. You think you want to build all new schools, and they say you can't, or you find out reasons why you need to do certain things. And after 3 years, that was the plan that we came up with. And I can guarantee you, if it does fail, it would be another 3 years before a plan came out of it. And to assume even for 1 minute that it's going to be cheaper, I mean, if we're looking for cheaper 3 years later, we're going to be in trouble, because that's the plan that's there. And if we start investing, if we don't pass this, we will be putting new roofs on old schools. And even myself, it's going to be hard for me to try to vote for a new school after we invest $5 or $10 million into an old school.
All right.
So,
well, I think pretty clear where everyone stands on that one. Want to get some other topics too. The next question is for Mr. De La Cruz, and it's from David Collins.
Mr. De La Cruz, as you just suggested, there's going to be some tough decisions in the General Assembly, the next session, budget decisions. Would you support cutting state spending and payrolls, or raising taxes, or would you support making the government more lean? And if so, how would you do that? Exactly what would you cut?
Oh, I think I'm walking into what I call, and I've described it, and talking to people outdoors, you kind of develop how you feel, because you're getting all these questions asked all the time. What are you going to do? We're walking into a 40-year problem. I state it that way because I think we've been eroding our Connecticut jobs. A lot of stuff has been eroding for 40 years, and for anyone to go up there and say there's this one thing that I'm going to pull the switch on. I've tried that at the RTM when I got elected in Groton, and I tried it at the council. You're looking for that hidden gem under the rock. And really, it's a result of, our unfunded pensions that we've done, again, called kicking the can since 1984. You could have a T-shirt made up kicking the can since whatever date that you got involved or that you remember. We were talking about budget deficits when I was in elementary school in the 70s. And they have grown. And how do you stop it? You stop it by taking little bites out of certain, the way we perform business. And one thing that brought us to me to run is our addiction issue, and starting to find out that we have 15,527 people in prison at a rate of about 100,000 a year. And I say that 100,000, that's the number I use. I know the state has about 55,000 out there, but they're not counting a lot of variables that happen when someone's in prison. That's a way I would start doing it, not paying 100,000 to have people in jail. And again, it's okay. How do you do the big thing? It's education, the way we deliver it. I think sometimes we could find better ways of doing that. A lot of the mandates that we have on the test, I hear over and over with teachers, wasted time that's actually put on top of teachers of testing the test. I met a music teacher yesterday who's so glad she retired 6 years ago, because now these kids it's basically a pass-fail for music in kindergarten. Just foolish things that we do that I think create more problems and more cost. We have to start looking at that. And again, I think the unions have negotiated contracts down a lot. Me as a union person myself, I'm not a state union employee, but really, I look at their folks that actually are getting in the unions today. They won't have certainly won't have what the unions had earlier. So that's working in a direction also. But we have to start funding it. And it's going to take a long time. It's, when you buy a house when you're 25 years old, you don't pay $150,000 on day one. You take 30 years to do it. And I think it's going to be a seismic shift in the way we do things, but I think I can bring that to the table. I certainly do.
And Mr. Bumgardner, if you could talk about your approach so far, you've been there 2 years, and what would be your priorities in addressing the fiscal problems the state continues to face?
Well, the fact of the matter is either Joe or myself will have to deal with, along with 150 other representatives, will have to deal with at least a $2.7 billion budget deficit. You're not going to solve that issue by simply making sort of arbitrary cuts to certain programs. Certainly, I think criminal justice reform is a critical function of the state of Connecticut to get to that point, but it's a very small piece of it. In order for Connecticut to balance its budget in not just 2 years, but 5, 10 years down the road, we must renegotiate contracts with our future pensioners and state employees. If we don't, we're not going to be able to fund any project, whether it's transportation investments in the future or new schools, without addressing that issue, because we will not have enough money to pay for those things. So I think Connecticut needs to look to what Rhode Island did, where they had a Democratic governor and worked with a Democratic legislature to pass reforms that, if you looked on paper, you would think a Republican signed them. And so that includes making changes to the cost of living increases to those future retirees. Certainly ensuring that future retirees contribute more towards their OPEB healthcare and their pensions. The fact of the matter is state employees are not receiving the same benefits as folks in the private sector. In fact, their packages at the end of it, by the time they retire, are very, very lucrative. So we need to make changes to that, because if we don't, we already have a ticking time bomb with our debt, and we could risk not being able to make payments to our state employees simply because about $200 million in our rainy day fund, and if we keep raiding it and run a deficit, we won't have any money to pay the bills. And this is a very serious issue that I think both Joe and myself need to be cognizant of, certainly with Joe serving on the town council and every legislator and the governor. So I think if we don't address these issues, my generation and will really, I think, feel the pinch, because debt is something that has to be paid in the long run. And when you look at the way Connecticut spends its money, it's really going to be my generation that ends up picking up the tab for, I think, years of reckless spending.
Mr. Dela Cruz, if you could react to what you just heard and the idea of his target is demanding yet more concessions from labor. I'd like to hear your reaction.
Yeah, and I would say labor they've made a lot of concessions, and again, I think the ticking time bomb you're talking about, I agree. These are large sums of money that need to be paid. But I'm always reminded of the large ticking time bomb that I call, and it's my coined phrase, I guess, but I call it the non-pension crisis. We are in the middle of a non-pension crisis in our country, and no one's talking about that because it's not funded at all. There's been reports where 6 out of 10 baby boomers, if they had a $1,000 automobile bill, that would change the way they lived in this month. And it's the fact that when I got into the workforce in 1989, I got a job with benefits, with health insurance. It was a non-union job. I worked there for 8 years. The union had tried to organize the company I was in with me being involved with it. They fired me, and they gave me my retirement check after 8 solid years of working with overtime, day in and day out. I got $1,600 in 1996 from that company. That's a crisis. The crisis to me is the fact that everyone that gets a job today, and it sounds good that we can get rid of pensions because they say, well, pensions don't work. Look what EB did. And I think EB is solid, and they provide really good 401ks for their people. But there's a reality, and I think it's a reality that unions have seen a long time ago, and maybe they want to call it big government or whatever you want to call it. But the fact is, if I'm working, me and you side by side, and we're in a non-union situation and there is no pension, well, you decide to be very fiscally responsible and work your 40 years and do all your matches and spend your money wisely and end up with about $1 million in your pension or your 401k, your personal. But Joe Dela Cruz decides to buy a boat, to pay for his daughter's wedding, to pay for their college, to do all these different things. And I'm not saying that it's a fund that you can't use, but in the end, when it's time to take care of you and I, you're going to take care of yourself. But if I'm somewhere that is in maybe an elderly housing assisted because I have no money, and nothing left, that concerns me. And that there's more of me at that point than there are of people that have contributed. I think it's kind of like it's the nutshell game, who's paying what, and that's kind of how I look at it. And maybe people agree or disagree, but I think there's a huge crisis in America with the non-pension. And again, I think state employees are looked as the and I'm not a state employee. Their pension, it is better than mine. There's no doubt about it. But I think a lot of us are looking at them as the Donald Trump that we know, the person that we know that's got all the money. And really, what is it? Maybe it'd be a $60,000 a year pension. That sounds incredibly lucrative to some folks. But if on the backside of it, they have zero pension and no future, that's to me is a tough bullet, because someone's going to pay for them at some point.
Let's give Representative Bumgardner a chance to respond to that. It sounds like Ms. Dela Cruz says the problem isn't so much that the government retirement pension and benefits are too good. It's that there's been such an erosion in the private sector that it's going to become a crisis. If you kind of address sort of the other side of the coin that he's raising on that issue.
Well, I completely disagree. In fact, I'm curious to see what my opponent has to say about actually answering the question, which is, how do you plan on solving Connecticut's budget crisis and deficits? And if you don't address the pension issue, if you don't address spending at the macro level, looking at every agency and creating efficiencies within those agencies, you're going to have to look to tax increases. And quite frankly, my opponent already has a track record of doing that at the town council level, voting for tax increases year after year in years when really taxpayers couldn't take it much longer, and certainly supporting budgets that rated the fund balance, which is the equivalent to the rainy day fund, which should not be depleted in times when we are in a fiscal crisis. So, I'm proud of my record. I'm proud of the fact that I have supported these reforms. I think my support of these reforms running 2 years ago was a large reason why I was able to defeat a four-term incumbent who supported these policies and really got us to in the situation where we're in. Long story short, I really think that this needs to be priority number one, not just for a Republican running for office, but I think even Democrats who if you support the union, for example, you want to make sure that you actually can make those pension payments to those retirees. And right now, we risk not doing that simply because we don't have the courage right now to tackle these reforms.
I'll give you a last chance on this exchange, Mr. Dela Cruz. He raised a couple of issues you might want to respond to.
Yeah, as far as my budget experience goes and my 9 budgets that I voted on, I was a member of 45 members of the RTM when I voted on all those budgets, and I was one of 9 on the council when I voted on those budgets. And I am proud of those budgets, and I voted to support many of those budgets. I did. But the funny thing is, at the municipal level, you are responsible. We're the bottom line. When we cut things, I think it's easy to say cut all the time, and really, I think that said a lot on the Hill. Like, just for example, they had cut Mystic Coast and County funding, and that's something that we looked at as a program that took probably 20 years to build. People don't know about Mystic Connecticut just because it was a lot of work by a lot of great people, and they did make a cut. But I think that's going to end up being a revenue loss for the state. Just like we did make a cut this last year, and again, I voted against the budget last year. It was a 6.7% decrease, but it included closing our library on Sundays. So those are the types of things that again, I think, call me fiscal irresponsible or responsible, but I think what's fiscally responsible is we have a group of folks that were using the library. The count was 250. And the librarian explained to us, you could only count because if a family of 4 walked in together, it'd be 1 beep. And our members of our council said, well, times are tough, and it's not always going to be able to work out for everybody. But I think of the person that uses the library on Sunday. I think of the person that may be filling out a job application, maybe taking a computer class online, or maybe they're just reading a book with their children. But it's positive interaction with the community. And when you cut out things like that, I look right to our addiction issue of everything I've learned about is people find other things to do. And usually it ends up being not the right things. So the cut is easy to say, and it may sound correct when you're talking to people at doors, but the reality is we have to temper that with what are we going to do once we cut, as far as closing libraries or doing all those different things. So there is, there is a situation that we're in. We owe a ton of money, and it is scary. But I don't look at the mountain that I'm climbing. I look at the rock right in front of me that I need to grab hold of and start pulling myself up. And we will get there.
Well, it's a good opportunity for my next question, which is to the representative. The challenges you face as elected officials, if you're fortunate enough to win, is exemplified by here we have this fiscal crisis, and layered atop of that we have this opioid crisis that in the past couple of years we've all recognized just how severe and prevalent it is. So within the context of the fiscal challenges we face, what do you see as the state's role in this next coming legislative session to try to better address this problem we're facing with opioid addiction and overdoses?
I've mentioned this before, but I couldn't fathom beginning to talk about this conversation without acknowledging the work my opponent has done on this issue since day one. And I think as a result of his work on this issue, I think Groton and New London, and certainly the entire region, are more equipped to combat the issue, are more knowledgeable of the issue, and have certainly, I think, have been able to identify a little closer with the issue, given the fact that with Community Speaks and Shine a Light on Heroin and those groups that have really talked about these issues at length, that they've been able to put a face and a story behind these struggles. And I think as a result, the community, I think, is in a much better position to solve these issues shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand. The first meeting I went to after having pretty extensive head surgery this past winter was a Community Speaks meeting with both Joe and Tammy. And when you're in that room, in that setting, and you just listen to the questions and the conversations that take place, you can really imagine the struggles that these people have gone through for a long time. A lot of it may be connected to being unable to find a job. A lot of it may be connected to simply having a addiction by virtue of your family. And so moving forward, I think it's critical that, one, we allow law enforcement to be able to in cases of where someone overdoses, that law enforcement is equipped to administer Narcan, which I think all communities across the U.S. have maybe 3-4 years ago that wasn't the case at all. So I think that's been a step in the right direction, and certainly I think when we're looking at treatment, ensuring that those people that are really having a difficult time getting off, whether it's heroin or prescription pills, that those people have a chance to be isolated in a program where they can rehabilitate. And right now, I'm afraid that there are many folks who go through those programs on a short-term basis and leave and end up back at square one. There's a very high rate of recidivism. So I think, again, identifying individuals in the community that needs the help, like the work Community Speaks has done, is critical to solving this issue. The outreach is important. And I think if you have that, which is probably about half the battle, and certainly the dollars for programs and programs where there's more oversight and accountability, especially when it comes to group homes. I was reading in the story in the day where there's a group home that, where the cot was on, milk cartons. I mean, that's pretty despicable. So I think when we're talking about this issue, we really need to raise the standard and take the treatment seriously. And really have, I think, better accountability and oversight over the programs where that are administering treatment for folks facing addiction.
Mr. Dela Cruz, what would you hope to accomplish on this issue if you were elected?
Yeah, I want to thank Aundre, too. As an elected official, Aundre did show up at our meetings. Aundre's called us and asked us how it was affecting the community, what he could do at Hartford. I think this is an issue that isn't bipartisan, really believe that, and Aundre showed that by coming out. I will say there are a bunch of things we can do that are different. For instance, with these past budget cuts, again, people are attached to these dollars. We've gotten calls from sheriffs. Now, our group has typically helped people that are 18 and over get help to get into rehab. Well, a sheriff called us concerned because before this budget went through, judges were automatically given a 7-day detox and then providing a 90-day treatment for, say if someone's on heroin and they're 14 years old and mom and dad just found out, which is completely normal now. Well, the new wave, and the sheriffs kind of were getting a feeling that it was going to be the 7-day detox, but then go back to mom and dad's house. And I can tell you by someone who's experienced it that you are not ready. You are not ready to deal with someone that is facing this addiction. They need professional help. Again, my fiscal responsible mind says let's give them, that 14-year-old, that great first recovery, that great first chance, and maybe they won't be in prison in 3 years at $100,000 a clip. I think that is a huge number, and I think we can actually save money by actually intervening early. There's a lot of other things. We've helped, again, through this addiction. My eyes have been opened. I think I've always been a good person, but walking into a church basement meeting that was a half mile from my house 3 years ago, and meeting 75 people, 2 kids who I coached in baseball that were in their 20s, look at me into the room and feel the shock, and I felt like I intruded on them, but I felt like the community let them down. And that day I decided that, my wife and I decided we're going to start something and help these people get the help they need. Again, I go back to my job that allowed me to send my son away. I think Deb was probably talking to me when I was at my most vulnerable, and I just couldn't wrap my head around not being able to just bring my son to the hospital. That's not what this disease is yet. We're going to make it that way. We're going to make it where if your kid is sick, then you're going to be able to get them the help they need. And again, how do you pay for it? That's what I hear at the doors. That's what I hear on my fellow counselors, and they say, we realize, Joe, how close you are to this issue, but how do you pay for it? My answer over and over again has been, how do you not? Because this is going to be a humongous burden on society. This is a whole generation of people right now. One woman joined our group because, and I always ask, why are you here? We average about 70 people a month at our group. And she said, well, I just brought my 21-year-old daughter to her 7th funeral and decided now was the time to start learning about this as a community. She compared it to when she was young as a 9-year-old in the Vietnam era, someone dying 2 towns away, and all 3 or 5 towns got together and did a vigil for a young man. I can't remember which town, but it was local. And she said, well, that was the one kid I knew that had passed away in Vietnam. And my daughter knows 6 or 7 people, maybe, and who knows next. But what do you do? She said, these kids are going through their own Vietnam, and it seems like we're not paying attention. So those are the kind of people we're meeting. It's hard to put a dollar on the savings that you'd get by helping someone out that way, but I think truly this is going to be maybe the disease that changes the way we look at a lot of things. It's changed me. It's made me want to run for this seat, actually, for numerous other reasons. But I'm not sure I would have actually asked my boss if I could be part-time during legislative session if it wasn't for this issue. And it's an issue I believe in. But on the flip side, I do believe it's an issue that we can get ourselves out of. Legislatively, how would I change it? At roundtable after roundtable, they've asked what would I do? Well, my answer is let's change the name of the drug. It's called Percocet and Percocet and Oxycontin currently. But we know 4 out of 5 people that are on heroin started with that. And I've asked every politician I've met. I've tried to do it on the town council in a small arena, and hopefully on the state they'll listen. But I want to change any opiate drug that has opiate in it, any painkiller, would be rated heroin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And that would stem the tide, because I'm sure when mom and dad brought 15-year-old son and daughter to the dentist for a prescription for their wisdom teeth, and they said, we're going to give you 2 weeks of heroin level 2 pills, that would open up a conversation, and it should be the conversation, because that's what those drugs are. And I think that would, again, save a lot of money, because we'd be keeping people out of this addiction.
And if you want a last word, just as someone who has campaigned as a fiscal conservative, some of the points raised by your opponent that this is something you have to invest in, I'd just like to give you a last word on that, Mr. Bumgardner.
I would like to add that the Republican plan, the budget that we put forward this past year did include those dollars for treatment, and whereas the Democratic budget did not include that. But I do think that when we're talking about this issue, in times past we focused on the incarceration piece of dealing with addiction and folks who are suffering with addiction. And I think the time has really changed in that the emphasis is now on rehabilitation and treating it as a health crisis as opposed to a criminal crisis. And so I think once you get to that place, I think then you can really move the ball forward with making a dent in this issue, because this is, quite frankly, a global issue and a national epidemic. So we are a very small piece of it, but I do think, again, being educated and supporting the right reforms, that I think Connecticut can make a big difference in getting people back on their feet.
I just want to quickly on the global issue part of it. Actually, it's not a global issue. It's an American issue. We're 5% of the world's population on the planet. We take 85% of the prescription drugs that are out there. It has a lot to do with lobbyists. You guys had and I'm going to compliment the day. You guys have done a tremendous job of keeping the story in the front page. About 3 weeks ago, you had that huge article that really explained how lobbyists for pharmaceutical companies have controlled not just the discussion, but the way that the Congress receives information on how they vote to make these drugs. Not only through the middle of this crisis last summer, they went from being allowed to prescribe a 15-year-old person Percocet and OxyContin. Through lobbyists and discussion with our Congress people, we're able to lower that to 11 years old, which is a tremendous feat considering how this has ripped our country apart. So this is our country situation, which is usually odd. Usually we can say global, but this is one of those situations where I think it's our own selves shooting our own selves in the foot. And and hopefully we can work on that.
And just to clarify, when I meant global, I mean the supply. So fentanyl, obviously, coming from China, and then certainly heroin having its traces, whether it's from South America or even Afghanistan. But absolutely, I mean, it's not a statistic I think our country should be proud of.
All right. As important as that is, we want to get a few more things. Next question is from Deborah Strasheim, and it's to Mr. Dela Cruz.
Hi. This speaks to the local economy and the state's economy. The state has been criticized as anti-business. What tax policy or other changes would you support to help improve the business climate?
Again, I think they look at us as anti-business many times, and it's the Florida and Houston effect. We've had that in our paper. Again, we just gave Sikorsky a $200 million payout to keep the jobs here. 100% for it. I realize what that would have done to our economy if we didn't have those jobs here today. But again, this is a national issue, and we're running for locally here for our state economy. But if you look in the article, it said that we had to come up with this money because they could just as easily go to Houston or Florida to make the very same helicopter for less money. And again, that will go back to Sikorsky having a journeyman machinist at $35 an hour. Well, if that job makes its way down to Florida, the very same job, working on the very same helicopter, is a $13 an hour job without a retirement. And again, it is putting a hole in the plug of a dam is what I see happening. Because our jobs, when I said the erosion of our jobs, that's something that's been happening for the last 30 or 40 years. And they are going to Texas and they are going to Florida. The only problem is when there's a population in Texas and Florida, a huge population that all receive earned income tax credits. So really, when those jobs leak out of Connecticut and go down to Florida, down to Texas, we are shoring up essentially the jobs we lost with earned income tax credits, with federal welfare, with federal housing acts. Actually, if it even goes back to what we spend on our special education right here in Groton, $22.5 million. Well, the original agreement with the federal government was we'd get 50 cents of every dollar for helping these people in special education. Well, the new number is we got $1 million. And that's kind of the number we've been getting all along since I've been involved in our local government. I'm sure if Groton was getting another $11 million for their special education, which was promised, and now diverted down south because, well, we're a little poorer and they're qualifying for different things. You can't come up from Texas as a governor and say, well, you're too expensive. when the reality is we're lifting up your whole entire workforce down there. It's something I see as clear as day. I think that's part of the conversation we have to change nationally for us to fix our budget up here in Connecticut. But it's happened, and I think that's really, and how does that help our economy here locally? And it needs to be, that conversation needs to happen, because we can't have to offer a company that's here that makes good money $200 million to stay because they're holding us hostage. Because that's this helicopter. There's going to be a helicopter 10 years from now, and if Trump got his way and ends the federal minimum wage, completely ends it, Houston could come up to our company right here in Groton and say, Miss Hillary, why would you pay Joe Delacruz $35 an hour when you can come down here to the great state of Texas and pay him $4 for the very same product and the very same work? And that's erosion that has happened over time. I have a cousin that moved here from Connecticut down to Florida. She's been there working 2 jobs. She's been there for almost 10 years as CNA up here, making about 15 or 16 an hour. She's down there making 11. And it's a tough job, and she works a lot of hours. Well, they just had that hurricane, and her fridge went out, and she lost all her food. The family got together and sent money down so she could buy food again. So their economy is doing great if you're in that gated community and you retired from up here and you live down in Florida now. But it's not so great if you're living there trying to make a future for yourself. And I think until we address that, it's going to be very, very hard for us to address our issues here locally, because we are supporting the rest of the country, I feel, with our wages.
All right, let's give Representative Bumgardner the chance to comment on the question, which is about the characterization of Connecticut being business unfriendly. Your opponents raised the national context for that. What do you see as your job if you're elected to try to increase job growth in Connecticut and improve that reputation?
Well, what does General Electric and Pfizer have in common? They both packed up a critical part of their operations here in Connecticut and here in Groton and moved up to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Why? Certainly you can reference the fact that they have educational institutions such as Harvard, MIT, and a wealth of other schools where they can pick the best and brightest students to become their future employees. But I do think there is a lot to be said about the fact that Massachusetts in the last year, with a Republican governor and a Democratic administration, has targeted their business climate as improving their business climate as the most important goal over the next few years. Within the last year, they reviewed every single regulation on the books. They decided that about a quarter of them would be eliminated and found that they were unnecessary. Another quarter were good, and the other half, over the next year, they will continue to review those and improve them to improve the small business environment and certainly the corporate environment across the whole. So I think at a micro level, when it comes to economic development, Groton and New London have no reason to, and this whole region, quite frankly, have no reason to be still struggling to come out of recession. What is it? Nearly only 80% of the jobs have been recovered since the recession, almost 10 years ago now. So these are not. These are problems that we must confront. I think certainly electric boats growth, where we can, Groton will be the beneficiary of at least 800 jobs, and in the long run, thousands upon thousands as a result of electric boat now beginning to build their Ohio replacement submarines. And so that represents an enormous opportunity for Groton. And I think Grosso Tech and certainly Three Rivers play a critical function in educating the next generation of workers that will certainly work there. And those are high, well-paying jobs and high-value jobs. And quite frankly, a lot of those folks will, by the time when they retire, will be able to retire here and be able to support their family on those incomes. So we have to take advantage of that opportunity. And I certainly think at the state level, we need to look at improving the business climate by cutting red tape and certainly by not increasing taxes anymore, which is tough. And I know it's going to be incredibly tough next year when we're facing, again, a $2.7 billion budget deficit. But we must refrain from it, or we do risk a GE or Pfizer leaving.
Before we get to another question, I wanted to give you a chance to respond, Mr. De La Cruz, to the point raised by Representative Bumgardner that New York, Massachusetts, they've seen triple the job recovery that Connecticut has. since the last recession. So is it really fair to kind of categorize it as a north-south issue wage-wise? Because other states face the same challenges Connecticut does. They seem to be doing far better with job creation.
I think we're the little brother in between these two big states, and I think they're going to get attention, especially the movement of a lot of high tech jobs. The millennials don't want to mow a lawn. They want to live in a spot where they're in a city where they can get on a train. The way we solve that, and it's been a dream of mine here locally forever, is we have tracks that go north and south of the river. If they connected all of our major attractions and employers, that may bring up business for us. Moves like that will make us more like Boston. And are we ever going to be Boston? No, but we do need a sense of place here. That's why I'm so proud of my work. That when I got elected in 2014, we went right to regulations, right to red tape. We came on. We were democratically elected. The first 5-4 advantage for Democrats in Groton in over 30 years. And then those 2 years with the help, Bob Frink really powered it. But we were able to get an outside consultant, which hadn't been done before in Groton. And they came in and did some research and made us look inside ourselves as Groton, as a community. And the results are incredible. Came up with millennials not wanting these big lawns. They wanted housing that connected them to trains. Maybe they don't want a car. They want a bike to drive to work. Those were all things that we didn't know. We also didn't know 8 out of 10 people leave Groton every single day after they get in their car after working at EB. And we want to change that dynamic and really want to ride that wave. And hopefully, I think that's something that we're going to be able to do. With the work we did early, before the EB announcement, we knew there was a problem. We had lost that $1.3 million when Pfizer took their building down. And I will remind you, I think GE left because, and I talked to a lot of people that were close to it, they wanted to go to Boston. What I don't like about the whole move is how corporations have kind of turned us into one big flea market. Hey, we're thinking of moving, and everyone's lifting up all this money. Here, come here, come here. Well, we hashtag Boston Strong, didn't we? We helped. We had our contribution to that tunnel. It was a $7 billion federal project, the Big Dig. Connecticut's contribution was probably in the hundreds of millions, maybe $200 million after we sent it to Washington and they sent it somewhere else. To me, how was that fair? You got these big cities that we've propped up and we've helped, and now when it's time to take a company, we're fighting like it's a flea market, and the money that we gave them for their tunnel is used to buy them from Connecticut. So I have this fairness gene in my head, and I always look at, how would that work? And if we were NFL teams and we took Tom Brady and we had a new team in Hartford, we would owe them an awful lot of money and an awful lot of draft picks. And it just doesn't seem fair, I guess. I don't know, but it's maybe a different view than anybody else has. But it's one thing that bothers me, and we never really performed an exit interview with them. And to me, one of your largest companies leaves your state. I think the legislature should have took it up and had them come in and do a complete interview, a forensic interview of why they left, so we don't. Right now, it sounds like we're throwing stuff up in the air. It was taxes, taxes, taxes. And the more and more people I talked to, it was more about connected community. And again, like you mentioned, being close to colleges. So those you can't win back possibly. But again, you should find out why they left and make a case for why we could have kept them next time.
All right. I want to get to some more questions here.
Sorry.
We're blowing through our hour, and that's okay. We've had a good discussion on a lot of these issues. The next question is from David Collins, and it's to Representative Bumgardner.
It's been a volatile year in presidential politics. Could you tell us if you support the candidate at the head of your party's ticket?
Certainly. So this question has been a question that I've thought long and hard since the rise of Donald Trump. It's been almost a little over a year since he has announced for president of the United States, and I don't think I've seen an election like this in my entire lifetime, nor do I think I will ever see an election like this again in my entire lifetime. I do have grave concerns about my candidate, and that was part of the reason why I refrained from really speaking about it early on in the process, because I really didn't know what was going to happen. Obviously, throughout the duration of this campaign, Donald Trump has said many incendiary things that are uncalled for and shouldn't be included in the political process. And I'm proud of the fact that Joe and I, in lieu of the fact that we are opponents, that we haven't stooped down to that level which both Trump and Hillary have engaged in now for months, and I think people are tired of that. I'm somebody who's socially progressive and fiscally conservative, and I'm not sure if Trump meets that bill. I've long liked Gary Johnson, even when he ran 2 years ago against Mitt Romney, and I plan on actually voting for him, which is not normal for a Republican to say and openly, but I think it's important that voters know that because he's somebody who is being well received by people in my population. In some polls, he's ranked number one with the millennials compared to Trump and Hillary. So I think that speaks volumes, and I think I wish there were more options, quite frankly. But I am very uncomfortable with both nominees, and I don't think that they represent the future in America and the greatest in America. And so I do think my party needs to do a soul searching after this. It has been very tough to run in this very volatile environment when we should be talking about issues confronting our state like a $2.7 billion budget deficit and Governor Malloy's failed record. So, I'm committed to continuing to talk about the issues, but I do plan on voting for Gary Johnson for president this November.
All right. Be fair, Mr. Dela Cruz, your candidate, the head of your tickets, had her own issues.
She has.
The use of the private server, which and the recent revelation that she seemed to have been told to vote as one thing and Wall Street executives something else. So, to be fair, I want to hear your view on the top of your ticket, what you plan to do.
Well, I'm voting for Hillary. I'm supporting Hillary, and I feel like we are down to two candidates. Gary Johnson will not be our next president under any circumstances unless something really crazy happens. So it's almost a vote that's probably not going to count. And I brought up Trump's name a lot of times, probably just in our debate, and as offensive as he has been from the very beginning, from everything he's ever said, he almost cost me every dime that I own personally. Because everybody at work was saying he'd be the nominee out of the Republican Party. I told them I'd bet my life and all my money on it. And if someone took me up on that, I would have lost because there were a lot of fine people, I thought, that were on that side, and they didn't come out of that side. And I think that you're stuck kind of with that candidate through that process. And the most dangerous thing that I hear him talk about, I mean, he said a lot of offensive things that I completely don't agree with. And I dismissed, early on I knew that's who he was, but when he talks about getting rid of the federal minimum wage, that's what gets my blood pressure going. Really, I think, and a lot. It goes back to you talking about issues. It's like we're not talking about issues. We're talking about a lot of things that, to me, that he does. I mean, they should matter because he would be the president of our country if he was there. I just dismissed the fact that he ever could be president. And now that I'm sitting here thinking that there's a chance, of course I'm supporting Hillary. I mean, she's the other side. She's going to be. There's two choices, and hopefully. We all get our thinking caps on here and make the right choice here in November because, and again, we need to bring other people in. I understand the actual being a union metal worker and walking on a site and talking to my guys and guys I consider brothers and sisters that say they're going to vote for Trump. There is something he has tapped into. The middle class has been hurting for a long time. And they're mad, and I get it. I get why they're mad, but I remind them: would cutting minimum wage to zero help the middle class? And those are the issues I want to talk about. Would cutting business taxes help the middle class? And so that's who. I guess that was a long answer to a short question. But, sorry.
Just so we get some at least one or two more questions, but I appreciate the response from both candidates. Next question to you, Mr. Dela Cruz. Do you think Governor Malloy is doing a good job? And Republicans have called him a job destroyer, and they've sort of made it a campaign as a good reason to vote against Democrats. So I'd like to hear you respond to those things. Do you think Malloy's doing a good job? And what are the argument that if you don't think he is, then you shouldn't be supporting Democrats like Mr. Dela Cruz?
I will say that I think again, the working class Democrats that put someone like Malloy up there, you're thinking you have this Democrat in there and they're not going to run from social issues, no matter what the budget conditions are. And Malloy went straight to cutting addiction services, social services, eliminating people that I think help other people, making our most vulnerable more vulnerable. I'm not happy with what he's done there at all. I do recognize the fact that just as one of us are going to go to legislature this year with this mountain of debt that we faced, didn't start 6 years ago. I mean, these are issues that have been going on and on and on. And like I talk about taking a bite, taking a little nip. If the big salt pile down there, if you told me to move that pile, how am I going to move it? I'd have to move it one shovel at a time. That's your only choice. You're not going to move the whole thing at once. And I think he was faced with that. Again, our economy hasn't been great. The revenue from our gas is down. And the fact that we rely on that is funny, but that's our economy, and that's how our economy has worked in the past. So there's some things that I think they couldn't predict. They thought the economy was going to get a little bit better, and it didn't. He might have a little bit of bad luck there, but I'm mostly unhappy with the way the governor kind of ran away a little bit from us, from people, from the way you cut social services. And I know times are tough, and I know I will be maybe one of those people that has to make that decision. I'm hopefully I have the gut that will keep me right where I need to be, because I know, again, any cut that was made today may end up being tenfold as a result of someone going to jail next year because they got in this addiction or something happened to them that didn't help them in a certain way. So, again, I think he's done a good enough job as he could. I think it was same as when Obama took over the country in 2007. I thought for sure me and my family would be waiting in line for bread. And if you remember, in 2007, the banks had failed. We weren't going to make cars in America anymore. Like the sky had fallen. Well, the stock market's pretty well off again now. And I'm not sure if that's a fake stock market, but we're back a little bit, and it's a little bit at a time.
I want to certainly give Representative Bumgardner a chance. No problem. So, kind of your perspective on Governor Malloy, and should people's perspective on the governor and the job he's doing or has done influence an election like this? Is that a factor you think? Should it be a factor for voters to consider?
Absolutely. Well, I think there's some fear that it could be a fear. It could be for some people, it could be a sense of joy. But the governor, a lot of people anticipate maybe for example, if Hillary Clinton gets elected president, that perhaps the governor will take some form of appointment with the president. So if that's the case, certainly we'll be looking at a very different picture. But as of now, we will be dealing with Governor Malloy for the next 2 years. And while I think he's been right on the ball on tackling tackling criminal justice reform with the second chance and acknowledging the fact that we are in a fiscal crisis and that we do need to have some form of pension reform, I do think that he has been a little too late many times around. And I would hope that even if the Republicans don't win one of the chambers this year, the House or the Senate, that in the future we can elect a Republican governor that will make these necessary fiscal changes, but also recognizes that as a society, we're forward-thinking, and I think there will be candidates that emerge that fit that bill. So, personally, I do have, Governor Malloy has been a bulldog, no doubt about it, especially with a lot of his political dissidents. He at a campaign rally in New London, the mayor of New London was on record saying that the governor has little respect for the Republican representative and senator, and I saw it myself on tape. And so I don't think politics needs to stoop down to that level. And even if he did say that and did indeed say that, I would never say such a thing about him. So I do think we are in dire need of a new governor and a new direction. But I do acknowledge that on some issues the governor has been a strong voice.
All right, with that, we, believe it or not, have to move to closing statements. And by a flip of the coin, Representative Bumgardner, you're going first, and you have a minute.
So it has been an honor and a privilege to represent the 41st District the last 2 years. Groton and New London are a microcosm of not just the state, but the U.S. economy. We've struggled to get out of recession. We've struggled with continued tax increases. But I see a bright future for this district, and I certainly see a bright future for Connecticut. This election is critical in that either chamber of the House or the Senate could change hands. And as a Republican representative who has a track record of working across party lines, I think I am uniquely positioned to assist in the team to tackle the critical issues confronting our state moving forward, whether it's our fiscal crisis, which is improving the business climate for small businesses such as the shellfishing industry, which I was active in cutting red tape at the state level and passing an amendment on the House floor, which hadn't been done in years, and working across party lines with the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus. I'm in a unique position and have cultivated relationships at an early age and am proud of my constituent service. And as a whole, I think I've earned my second term. And no doubt about it, I think my opponent is a very worthy candidate as well. And I wish him the best of luck in the next 3 weeks.
All right. Thank you. Ms. De La Cruz, you get last word, minute summary.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks again, Aundre. Again, a stand-up young man. Really proud to be in this debate with him, and thank you folks for having us. But I've been around. It's 45 years, and actually with my 9 budgets, when we get up there and we know these are going to be a couple tight fiscal years, that there's going to be some fighting to be done up there in Hartford, and we're going to have to bring money back to our constituency, and that's Groton and New London. That's what I plan on doing. While help solving a lot of problems that the state has had for many years. I think I'm a different voice. I'm someone that's been I'm a construction worker. I'm someone that's renovated 3-family houses of my own, lived in New London. I understand how middle class is affected, and believe that any true recovery that we ever have in our country or in our region, if it's not pulling people along at a rate that is a rate that they can live with, a rate that they can self-sustain at, then it's a fake economy. And I think sometimes we've been in the middle of a lot of fake economies over the years, but this seems to be the tipping point where there's a lot of folks that don't have they don't have those means to retire. So again, I am excited about our region. EB is here. We're going to have a lot of jobs, and there's a lot of good things coming up. So thank you again, and vote for Joe in 2016.
All right. We thank both our candidates. That concludes today's discussion. Remain online on theday.com through the election. Remember to vote. Thank you.